Let's Hang Out on Air is now live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I'm Christiana Ellis.
And I'm Mike Mateen.
We're here tonight talking about Survivor Worlds Apart, Episode 8. Now, we talked last time about it being a little bit confusing what to call it, given the double episode, but as best I can determine based on CBS's own stuff, they are calling this one 8. So that's what we will call it as well.
8 it is.
All right. 8 is enough. No, it's not. I don't know where that came from, other than the obvious. Anyway, though, this was a pretty good episode. It's a lot of stuff going on in this season. It's complex. There's so many different pieces in play that are all having their various effects on things. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, especially as we've kind of. I'm glad that we got to the merge. A little early because a lot of the more fun stuff has happened since then.
Definitely agreed. Let's just go ahead and jump right in from the beginning. We start right off with Rodney blaming Mike for Kelly getting voted out because, according to Rodney logic, they were all going to vote for Haley, but then Mike was the one that wanted to change it up in order to test Will's loyalty, which might be true, but that's certainly not how it was presented to us in the previous episode. I mean, there was that whole loyalty test angle, but the idea that it was going to be Haley until they changed it up.
Yeah, that isn't how it went down. It was, I thought, always going to be Jen, and they just told Will Haley.
Yeah, that's certainly the impression that I had too. And in any case, it still comes down to, well, it might have been Haley, it might have been Jen. And not only that, but we actually talked about how theoretically they would have had the numbers to split the votes if they felt like they needed to. And so it's Rodney doing Rodney's thing to try to make that somehow Mike's fault. Although, interestingly enough, the other thing that he blames Mike for later actually is semi-more reasonable in the sense, at least, that it was something that Mike did against Rodney's wishes that you could argue is, namely, voting out Joaquin instead of Joe back when that happened.
Yes. And he is right that if they had had Joaquin there, or if they had gotten rid of Joe, then Joe would not be winning all these challenges. That is accurate.
Yeah. It's true. It's true. And of course, Rodney has extra reason to be mad about that because the whole reason that Joaquin was voted off in the first place was because he and Rodney were too close. So we can definitely see why Rodney wishes that had gone the other way.
Yep.
But he also seems inclined to just blame Mike for everything right now. Anyway, he and Will talk a little bit, and Will is understandably kind of freaked out that he ended up being the only one to vote for Haley. And it absolutely makes sense why he would be a little bit alarmed by that. And then Rodney was right there to kind of blame that all on Mike too. So it's interesting, though, that their plan is not to move too quickly. This is, again, where it comes down to what we talked about last time, namely, is Rodney smart? Right? Because the easy flippant answer is no, and yet he's mad at Mike. He thinks Mike needs to go, but he is not suggesting that they do that right away. He's suggesting that they get rid of these other enemies first, and then once they've narrowed it down to this 7, that's when they take control.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's more patient than we might immediately assume that Rodney would have, given his penchant for needing to go off and punch trees and stuff.
And I'm just really hoping that's not how this goes down, because I really want Rodney and Dan to go out before a lot of the people that I like.
Dan, Rodney, I have kind of almost come around to finding him more good TV, especially since at least some of the stuff that he has done hasn't been as bad lately, other than him just being kind of grumpy and ornery. But Dan he sucks. He's a jerk.
Yeah, he just.
And the thing is, yeah. And he doesn't even realize it. He sincerely seems to. I don't think he understands what he's doing. He thinks he's a nice guy, and it's this awful, he is just a perfect example of this kind of person who wants so much credit for being a nice guy, and if you're not willing to give him that credit, then you're just a bitch.
And he should be slapped around.
Yeah. I couldn't believe it because, this is later in the episode, obviously, but I was literally typing in my comments, my notes, is he being a dick on purpose for any strategic value or just for the general sake of dickishness? And that was immediately when he said, look, I'm really trying to be nice. I really am. Like, dude, this guy. Yeah, anyway, that's a little bit later.
Well, and it clearly wasn't strategic since he followed that up with a confessional where he said that he didn't know her name because she was too annoying and someone should just slap her till she shuts up. That was pretty horrible.
Yeah. Well, and not to mention, she's going to be on the jury, dude. What the fuck? Like, even if you're right that she's going to get voted out because she's just a pawn, she's going to be on the jury.
And so will lots of other women that she just has to be like.
He's picking a fight for no reason, for him to be all about, another Survivor superfan who can't do basic math. Well, how about failing to understand the basic premise of the game? Yeah. So yeah, Dan has definitely become a guy that I'm rooting for his downfall. Like, not just so he'll be gone, but I want him to receive his comeuppance. And I was kind of hoping that it would happen tonight, but oh well.
Yeah. I mean, I was hoping for that too. I really was. It just didn't. It wasn't going to play out that way, unfortunately.
Yeah. We'll get more into that later. But in the meantime, back at the camp, we also have Mike expressing his respect to Haley and Jen for the play, even though obviously it wasn't what he wanted to have happen. Mike is really, he's kind of a class act, not always necessarily, but he enjoys this game and he's able to treat it like a game. You know what I mean? Like, he's playing it seriously. It's important to him, but he also doesn't have to be a jerk. It's like he is able to go to them and say, listen, one of my biggest allies is gone now because of what you did. It was directly against my best interests. But as someone who likes the game, I have to say, good job, because that was a very effective move you did.
Mm-hmm.
And he's able to say that. And I think that, even if we wanted to be cynical and say that it's just about him actually having an awareness of the jury idea, even then, at least you could give him credit for that. But he also just generally seems to mean it. After kind of a rough start this season, he's turned into one of my favorite players. Yeah,
I'm definitely him, Joe, and Jen are my favorites.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I am rooting for Shireen to outlast Dan, really rooting hard.
Mm-hmm.
Just because.
Yeah. I think Dalton Ross said in his recap that he is half hoping for Shireen to win just to watch Dan's head explode.
I would agree with that.
So anyway, We have Jen and Haley, though, who at this point in the episode seem to have lowered their expectations, because even though they had a good move there, the numbers are still clearly not in their favor at that point, and it seems like they're more focused on trying to make a mess while they can as opposed to winning, which, I don't know, it seems, I mean, it's not like they gave up exactly, but it also, I was surprised to hear that kind of talk right on the heels of their really successful idol play.
Well, I mean, I think just the reality set in after that, because the only reason they played the idol is because they felt like they exhausted every option.
Yeah.
They really tried to work everybody that last time.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see it again, I think, in the preview for next week. I think that they are a little worn out.
Yeah.
This, so it was just hard to like reboot and be like, okay, now that we did that, what's next? Well, it's still the same options that we've already tried.
Yeah, it's still a little bit of an adrenaline crash.
Yeah.
Too. At the same time, I feel like there's a little bit of a strike while the iron's hot quality to what they did, that, they need to take advantage of the chaos they created and be willing to just get right in there. Because the removing Kelly from the equation means everybody's going to have to resettle into a new position, and you need to be prepared to just do that right away. So
right.
You don't have time. You need to take advantage of this new chaos you've created.
Which is what Mike did really well, was they created the chaos, and then Mike immediately went and said, I mean, he didn't use these exact words, but you could tell he was kind of the guy who calmed everybody down and said, it doesn't change anything. These numbers still work this way. We're all still good.
Mm-hmm.
And he made sure that the two people, Carolyn and Tyler, everybody was just still on board. Like,
yep.
He really got everybody back in line, as opposed to, like you said, Jen and Haley and Joe being able to come in and try to like swoop some people away.
Mm-hmm.
Joe only tried to do it out of necessity, and I think that's part of why it failed, because Tyler was clearly open to it.
Mm-hmm.
So had they maybe made this move immediately after the tribal council and they had gone to Tyler and said, here's how we can do some things, Tyler definitely wants to be a part of something like that, because he does realize that his position in that other alliance. However, when you come to him out of necessity and you don't necessarily offer him that much better of a position, he's not going to go. And that's what ended up happening,
Well, and I think
this finding the Sierra thing earlier.
Yeah.
If they had caught that earlier and grabbed her right afterwards, then maybe they had a chance, because she was clearly wanted to do it, but didn't think it was in her best interest.
Yeah. I mean, I think that my guess is that she didn't do it because Tyler could not be persuaded. That's my guess.
Which he couldn't be persuaded because Carolyn couldn't be persuaded, and that messes up your all-girl thing if Carolyn's not a part of your plan.
Right. Well, Carolyn wasn't one of the ones sitting there on the beach anyway, so I feel like Carolyn wasn't even in their plan. They wanted 5, right? So there was Sierra, Shireen, Haley, and Jen, and they wanted a 5th, and they were going to try to get Tyler.
Well, you're right. Then maybe that was their error, was to go to Tyler instead of Carolyn and say, because Carolyn might have been more interested in this all-girl thing, because in her mind, it puts you final 5 with your idol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, at the same time, there does seem to be some tension between Carolyn and the other girls, so Shireen in particular.
Yes.
But I don't know if there's some with Jen and Haley as well.
Yeah, that's true. She does seem to bond better with the blue colors in general.
Mm-hmm. And I think what part of the deal with Tyler was that you got some really excellent play from Mike in sort of being aware that something was happening with the idol clue, which we'll talk more about later, but then just walking right up on them and basically spooking Tyler into telling him about the clue, right? And puts Tyler in a tough spot. And made Tyler choose, because Tyler probably would not have, he would have tried to sort of keep one foot in both camps as long as he could. But Mike made it so that as long as he could was not very long.
Yes.
And then,
That's one thing Mike did very well this episode. I mean, he controlled all the variables, and quickly.
Yeah, he did. So the next morning, this first morning after tribal council, we have some Rodney and Shireen food-based conflict that seemed mostly like Rodney picking a fight for no apparent reason. Because he asks, like, how much rice is that? And Shireen basically says, well, it's 3 scoops, like we all agreed. And then he just comes in and is like, put some more in there. And it's like, not even like she disagreed with him. It's more like, but we decided as a group. So I'm not going to do it just because you tell me to. Especially since apparently that's a thing for more than just her, is that people are a little concerned that he's maybe eating more than his fair share.
Yeah, I mean, Joe just straight up called him out on it.
Yeah. And then the whole thing about peeling the salami was, I think, a perfect example of that sort of exhausted argument you can have where it's over something dumb and you both know that it's over something dumb, but then you end up in that position of having to say, this is such a dumb argument. Why won't you just do what I say? But you're both saying that. And I mean, it seemed like the reasonable solution was, you can peel the one you're going to have if you want, but don't peel all of them. But no. Because it was clear that it's, and he's kind of like, well, I'm just saying that's what I wanted. And, if that's what you want, you should say so. And she's like, I did. That's what started this argument. So that was some entertaining stuff, even though it didn't especially go anywhere. Because that pretty much brought us right up to the reward challenge. And the reward challenge was another nice little bit of note-taking serendipity, because just as I was typing, those are some really narrow crooked balance beams. I wonder if anybody's going to fall off of them. And then, of course, Dan and Shireen promptly did. Because, sometimes people will stumble and then just kind of have to hop off, but both of them just fell on their asses. Yep. Or rather, Dan kind of dropped his crotch on it. And then Shireen fell backwards onto her butt. I don't know that I would do much better. Those looked like really narrow balance beams. So the balance beams plus the slidey puzzle. Oh, wait, no, this was the anchor puzzle at this point. The slidey puzzle was later. And the reward is the zip line through the rainforest, followed by a pizza picnic. So Joe, Mike, and Haley are the 3 that move on to the puzzle stage. And then in the puzzle, Mike starts out strong, but then kind of falls behind. He seems like he kind of chokes a little bit. There was a couple of shots of him like telling himself to calm down, and Probst actually describing it as he's panicking.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a reasonable thing. I think a lot of times when people, lose out on these puzzle challenges, that's why. You just have so much adrenaline going, and you can't just think about it analytically. So Joe wins.
Well, but Dan.
Oh, that was the sliding puzzle later.
Oh yeah, you're right. Sorry.
Yeah. No, right. I was wanting to jump ahead to that too, but this was the anchor.
That's right.
Yeah. So Joe wins, and he is allowed first to pick 3 people, and good on him for thinking strategic rather than just picking his buddies. He goes after the people that they're trying to lobby back into their camp. Tyler, Will, Carolyn. Mm-hmm. I thought that was really great. One of the things that occurred to me during the choice, although I'm not sure that I necessarily think it would have been the best idea, would be what if you were trying to sort of sow dissension in the other alliance by picking someone unexpected from the blue camp, like Rodney or something. Now, I don't know that that necessarily would have been helpful, but it did cross my mind to think about it, like just this idea of sort of playing mind games, sowing the idea that someone might not be loyal.
If you were going to do it, you wouldn't pick Rodney because Rodney would be the one to start that dissension.
Yeah.
You'd want him back at the camp wondering why they took one of the blue.
Right. Yep. Mm-hmm.
They have something special going on. What's going on? Why is Mike doing? What's Sierra doing over there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. In any case, he picked Tyler, Will, and Carolyn, the people who are more obviously the swing vote. And he gets to pick one more person, and Rodney gets really passive aggressive and then kind of overly pompous about taking himself out of the running when he gets called on it. Which is kind of even further passive aggressive, but sort of self-destructively so at that point.
Yeah.
So that was kind of just funny. And it was I think this is part of why Rodney is growing on me a little bit. Not in the sense that I want him to win or anything remotely like that, but just he's kind of a cartoon. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he is.
It's just that whole thing of like, not emotional, I'm just keeping it real. Keeping it more real than any of you guys. He's kind of a weird guy. He's very emotional, but doesn't like to think of himself as emotional.
Yes.
That's why he has to go off and punch trees and say things like, I have to respect you to give you respect.
He did say that.
Yeah. So in any case, Joe decides instead to pick superfan Shireen. And of course, her extremely enthusiastic reaction. And he says, that's why.
Yep. Well, I do want to touch on, though, that I think I feel like this is what got Dan going to why he behaved. Partly, I mean, not just because he's a jerk, but what got him started.
Yeah.
Was,
I think so.
They were talking about how she was the super fan and she wanted to go on this reward. And Dan kind of looks and he's like, well, I mean, if that's the reason, I'm a super fan.
Mm-hmm.
And not only did he just sort of dismiss Dan, and he still referred to her by the title super fan.
Mm-hmm.
I think Dan took some insult to the fact that like she's considered the super fan and he doesn't feel like she's doing a very good job. And he considers himself a super fan and no one is giving him credit for being a super fan.
Mm-hmm.
And so he took that out on her later.
Yeah, I think you might be right. I didn't really make that connection, but now that you pointed out, I think you're absolutely right. The only other thing that I want to note before we move on is that did you see the bit? So after Rodney does his whole "I'm the realest player to play this fucking game," Jen kind of mutters under her breath, "Oh, I fucking hate that guy." I know. I love that she couldn't even just keep that to herself. It was just like
too funny.
Yeah. And then despite her enthusiasm, Shireen is awkward even at ziplining. One of the things about ziplining is I'm sure that it's actually super fun, but ever since they did a South Park about it, it kind of always sticks in my head when I hear about it. And the South Park episode was basically that all of these zipline tours are basically selling people a bill of goods that it's not actually able to deliver most of the time. But I don't know. I've never actually done one, so.
My mom is ziplined, and she was pretty happy with it. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, good. Maybe you just have to be a cynical asshole like the South Park guys to.
Yeah. I think it's caught that it's kind of become a trend, and
Well, I think that's certainly true too.
Poke at it, yeah.
Kind of becomes a thing. It's also a thing that I think lots of times they're sort of billed as these sort of environmental activism sorts of tours when they're actually not necessarily great for the environment to have all these tourists tromping through the jungle. I don't know, though. I shouldn't really speak out on this because I am ill-informed other than having seen it on TV. In any case, Shireen is happy to be on the reward, but a little bit annoyed that Carolyn is there, which is interesting just because I guess I hadn't fully remembered that they don't like each other.
Yeah.
Also related to Carolyn, though, is her inability to tell that there's a thing in her bottle of soda. Which I don't know, if there's a label on it and you're only holding it upright, you're not looking down into the bottle, which why would you normally? I don't think I'd normally look down into my soda bottle necessarily. But at the same time, Joe sees it and he's being pretty smooth up until the last little bit when unfortunately Tyler happens to just look over right at the wrong moment.
Yep.
So what do you think about Joe's response to that? Because I think in Dalton Ross's recap, he felt that it was a mistake to share the clue with him.
I mean, hindsight is 20/20.
I mean, obviously it didn't go well, but
right. It's hard to pick because had Joe knows Tyler is open to doing something different, saw this as an opportunity to approach him with it, and also not cause what ended up happening when Mike saw them. Because he probably felt like Tyler was going to do that if he didn't share it with him, and his only shot was to, go on this like bonding adventure with Tyler, looking for the, idol together and doing this thing together. I think of his options, it was definitely not the worst option. When we look and see how it went down, yeah, it didn't work out well, and it didn't look like it was a smart thing to do. But what should he have done? If you think about what the result would have been if he just chose not to,
yeah,
Tyler would have called him out on it, and he would have said, "What? No, I don't have it." And then Tyler would have gone back to the camp and said, "Joe's got an idol clue," and then everyone would have been following him around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, that's really kind of where it ended up anyway, but it's also true that even when it ended up of everybody looked for Joe, he's looking for the idol, but then they also all had the clue to use for their own searches where they wouldn't have necessarily otherwise. But I agree with you because, first of all, Tyler saw him with the clue and knew exactly what it was. And so there was not going to be any pretending there. And I think that you're right that simply flat out refusing to share, it's like, I know you saw me with it, but I'm just not going to share it with you. That doesn't go well.
Yeah,
that's going to basically tell Tyler that I'm not willing to work with you.
Right, because then he doesn't even have a shot at ever getting Tyler on his side. And the end result is basically the same, minus that everybody knew the clue. But,
Well, right, but that's the gamble that you take. If, the choice to not tell anybody has already been removed because Tyler saw you with it. So now the choice is take a gamble that doing this will help bring Tyler over to our side, but you risk the information contained within the clue. Alternately, you force him to not be on your side, and then maybe you still find the idol with you being the only one having the clue, but it's hardly a sure thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think this really blew up because of two reasons. If you were going to question anything that he did, I mean, I think you should be more critical of the fact that they should have paid more attention to when they left camp and how and who was around.
Yeah.
I think that was the bigger error, not just, I mean, choosing to tell Tyler wasn't that big of a deal, but not making sure that you didn't get seen was a bigger problem.
Yeah, although I have to say, I think they took reasonable precautions and it only blew up in their face because Mike played it really well.
That was going to be my second part of this, is that it went really poorly because Mike did a very good job of not only seeing them, but then going and forcing Tyler to make a decision.
Right.
If Mike's out of that equation, I don't think this goes so poorly. I think Tyler does go look with him. You know, they work together, and that extra time with Joe, maybe Tyler continues to think through some new options of what to do with his game. But when he was forced to make a call on the spot by a guy who is de facto leader, you know, who came at him fairly, I mean, it was direct. I don't want to say aggressive. He was very direct with Tyler.
Well, yeah, I think that Tyler probably read the tea leaves there and concluded he knows what he saw. And if I don't admit it, he's going to know that I'm lying to him. Okay, because it wasn't a question of like, hey, what were you guys talking about? I think he was able to read between the lines and say he knows what we were doing.
Yeah,
and now he's giving me the opportunity to either come clean or to lie. And I think so I think Tyler read that situation correctly and did really the only thing that he could have done for his game at that point. Now, I think he still potentially could have made the other decision later, and we'll talk about that. But at least at this point, I think he did the right thing for his own game. I think at this point, there was no continuing to lie about it without just, again, completely closing the door to one of your two big options.
Yeah.
And then we get some, looking for idols because despite them knowing now, okay, here's the deal. I think Joe saw Tyler go off with Mike after that conversation and said, this is not going to go well. I better skedaddle out of camp, make myself scarce until I can find this thing. And that led to that sort of comical manhunt. I kind of in my head imagined Mike as Tommy Lee Jones from The Fugitive. I want an hard target search. Yeah. In any case, though, let's talk about Mike's interesting choice to say is like, I found Joe, I saw him looking, but I didn't see him find it, but I'm going to tell people I saw him find it.
I mean, ultimately, it looked like it had no bearing, but it was interesting.
Yeah, because often we've talked about the idea of an idle bluff, like pretending you have it even if you don't, as being something useful to you. So it's interesting to see it played the other way around. Like, I'm going to put a target on your back even bigger than there was before. Because the problem is, if the goal is you want to get rid of someone, telling everybody he has an idol is going to make people more spooked to vote for him.
Yeah, but at the same time, what it does is takes your people who are maybe, on the edge and makes that a less attractive option to flip to. Because now the biggest threat also has an idol. Like, why would you join up with that? Like, he's never going to take you. Because even if you get him into even if you flip over and join their side, once you get down to the time when you can start maneuvering, the guy you want to get rid of has the idol. So it's less attractive to be on that alliance if you're not solid.
Right. You have people who might be willing to cast a vote to flush the idol, even if they wouldn't have necessarily been on board. Otherwise, they might be considering the other option that way.
Though I think that's all. They didn't really talk about it, but I feel like it
kind of didn't play out that way because he won the individual immunity. So kind of.
And they didn't seem concerned that he might have given his hidden idol to Haley, since they didn't split the votes on her.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there was probably a thing later that we didn't see where Mike was like, no.
Well, I mean, I think unfortunately they don't have the numbers to split the votes anymore, right? I mean, it's
Oh yeah, true.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's so 10 people.
Yeah, but no one seems super concerned that Haley had Joe's idol.
It's true. Of course, I think it's also could be that they're figuring, well, we didn't think that Jen or Haley had it, but Jen just played it. And so what other idol could Haley have had other than this theoretical new one that we went around looking for today? But if people kind of felt like they had a handle on her comings and goings that day, then what other idol could she have?
Well, if Mike had
if Joe had it, he could have given it to. Yeah, right, okay, you're right.
He didn't need it.
Yeah.
If Joe had it, he most certainly would have given it to her or Jen. I would think, because they need to, if they take one more of them off, now all of a sudden they don't need two to flip.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think if he did have it, they were hoping that they had the white collar people to flip.
Oh yeah, that's actually true. They seem surprised that they didn't have
right. I mean, because
Tyler.
Yeah.
Not the white collars, Sierra and Tyler.
Right.
They did seem confident in that.
Yeah, I don't think that Joe would have given his idol to Haley, because first of all, I'm not sure that they would have thought Haley was the target anyway. Because one of the things that Haley actually said in her Ponderosa video is that her bigger shock, bigger than going home, or bigger than just going home anyway, is that she assumed that it would have been Jen that the other side was going for.
Since that's who they went for before.
Yeah. And so I think probably everybody targeting Haley was probably a direct response to people might think it's Jen. And so let's get Haley instead.
That's true. And they seem, like I said, convinced that they seemed convinced they had the numbers. Mm-hmm. They had convinced Sierra and Tyler, so they wouldn't have Joe would not have given up his idol, because if he doesn't win immunity next time, he absolutely needs it.
Yeah, and so I think it was interesting that I suspect Sierra's talk about, having plenty of alternatives was to some extent to keep them pacified.
Well, I thought it was interesting the way that Joe played it, in that, he denied it at first, and then, Mike kept saying, just kept going with it. And he was just like, yeah, you got me.
Well, I think he probably recognized that people are not going to believe him if he says he doesn't have it.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. I like that he recognized that.
Right.
That's not necessarily an easy thing to recognize.
Yeah, no, and I agree that basically saying I might at least try to take that for, use it for my own advantage if possible, given that people are not going to believe me the other way anyway. So own it, at least, if you can't change it. And then, so this is about the point where we have that whole conversation between Dan and Shireen. And the exchange I wrote down, at least while they were still talking, was, why would you align yourself on the short side of the stick? And she says, I think you just don't understand my game. And he kind of laughs and says, you're right, I don't. Now, before we get in more or talk more about just him being a jerk generally, let's talk a little bit about whether he's got a point there. My take is that Shireen is aligning herself on the short side of the stick, so to speak, because they're the only people that are being even remotely nice to her.
Yes.
And so I don't think that it's actually strategy that has led her to choose this other alliance. I don't think she has some secret plan. I think it's just because the only person who's even reached out to her a little bit is Haley, and maybe to a lesser extent Joe and Shireen seem like they're okay. Everyone else seems to find her annoying. So why, who else is she going to ally with?
Yeah, I agree. that she was sort of forced into that alliance and has owned it because she knew that's what she needed to be a part of.
Yeah.
So she says, you don't understand my game, because she has to feel like it was a game choice, not that, which it was a game choice in that she like went hard with it. Once she like saw the opening, saw that people accepted her, she just ran with it and said, I'm with these people. They can count on me.
Yeah, you don't try to form the alliance with the people who already hate you and find you annoying if you can avoid it. And that's a social part of the game too, right? Like that is gameplay. Now, just because I don't necessarily think she has some ulterior motive, secret plan, end game, I think it's simply a matter of she has played the cards that she's been dealt. She made a decision, and it's not like it was definitively the short end of the stick before they lost a couple of times, right? I mean, so it's not, I don't know if,
that's why I would have loved to have seen this actually go down this time, because, it would have been Dan going home. First of all, he would have felt like an absolute idiot because he had belittled her, and yet she had been a part of the group that convinced his numbers, his basic math, to collapse. Like, that's what he seems to forget, is basic math. There is no basic math in this game. Like, these are real people, and the math always changes. Because y'all have made it sound simple with the 7 doesn't necessarily mean you always have the 7.
It suddenly makes me think of Star Wars, and the more you tighten your grip, the more star systems will slip through your fingers. It's like the idea of having lots of numbers, is good in principle, but it's difficult to control that many people, especially when you get someone starting to think, I don't really want to be number 7. Maybe I could be number 4 over there. Yeah. So, and especially given, like, it would be one thing if it seemed like what he was trying to do was some sort of a sincere, like, what are you doing over there? You should come back over and be with us. Like, we want you over here, and we don't understand why you're not choosing us. Like, if there was some sort of a sincere, like, if we thought for a second that he actually wanted her on their side, then that would have been a very different conversation, and some of the same points might have come up, but in a very different emotional context, right? Whereas I think that you really spotted something very interesting there, I think, which is this idea that she has kind of now been, labeled the super fan of this season. And I think that there's an element of, he finds her just annoying generally. And I think there's the jealousy of like, well, I'm a super fan too. How come she's the one that gets to be the super fan? And the other thing is that he really just seems to have a problem with women.
Yeah. This is not the first time he has said something incredibly misogynistic.
Yeah, and the thing is, though, that it's a little bit like what we talked about earlier. He really doesn't get it, in the sense that he is exactly the sort of guy when you would say, I think you're kind of misogynistic. And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm not misogynistic. I love women. He's the kind of guy who would say that, right? It's like, well, okay, are you attracted to women, or do you actually respect them as fellow human beings with just as much dignity and intelligence as you have?
Well, and what the reality in his mind is that he does if they behave the way that he wants them to. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like you pointed out, as soon as they don't, I respect most women, but I just don't like her as a person because she's just a bitch, Like,
someone needs to slap her so that she'll shut up.
Yeah.
What an asshole.
Anyway.
It's one of those things. I have no doubt that, what he'll say when, he finally comes out is, he'll blame the editing and all of that. And you know, again, while we've certainly talked in the past about how it's true that the editing can emphasize elements of someone's personality, you know, they can focus more on one side and ignore the other. But you still have to say the things that they show on camera. And, you know, they can't show a scene of you saying something that you didn't say.
Yeah, it's not like there's some other context in which that's ever an okay thing to say.
Yeah.
You know,
it's also not the first time.
It's true.
Yeah.
So yes, the editors have chosen to broadcast all of the incredibly misogynistic things that he thinks and says.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things too, you know, when in this week's interview where Dalton Ross asks Jeff Probst questions, he asks him specifically about this context of what was Dan, the proclaimed superfan, thinking in picking a fight with someone for no reason who's going to be on the jury. Like, why would you do that? It makes no sense. And what Probst was saying basically is, you have to remember that the way this game wears down on people, this is something we've talked about before, you can't maintain a facade in that environment. So no matter what you if you come in with this idea that, oh, well, I'm really like this, but I'm going to pretend to be like this for the gameplay, you're not going to be able to keep that up. And so, you know, he might think of himself as a nice guy who doesn't bully people, but this is what comes out. And, you know, it's also true that, you know, maybe there's a lot of people in the world who maintain civility only under the comforting pressure of civilization. You know what I mean? And suddenly when you don't have that pressure around you, you kind of drop that pretense. I don't know.
Yeah, true.
So it might be that this side of him doesn't come out very often in normal circumstances, but it's clear that it's there. In any case, Dan's a jerk. I hope he gets voted out. In the meantime, we have Mike still looking for the idol, eating some termites, hurting his finger. Not in any injury way, just that there's about 15 seconds devoted to him going, ow, oh, ow. And I thought this was kind of a great sequence because, you know, certainly the idea of the brief montage combined with interview that accompanies anybody ever finding an idol. I mean, the editors know an effective trick when they see one and they use it every time, right? But this one I thought was pretty good, and there was an emotional intensity to it that I feel like was more powerful than a lot of the times when they do this. Because everybody's happy to find it, but this one just really emphasized this idea of it's important to him, and he is working himself literally to exhaustion and getting a little bit emotionally drained even as a result, but then the catharsis of actually finding it. And
the happy dance.
You're the happy dance. Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. You know, it's interesting with Mike that I find myself liking him and rooting for him in ways, even at the same time that more generally, I feel like I'm on the other side of the two alliance battle.
Yep. I agree. I feel the same way. So.
Yeah.
But it's hard to not like his passion and enthusiasm and playing with skill. He's playing hard. He's playing well. He's not a jerk.
Mm-hmm. And so he does not plan to tell anybody about his idol. Good for him. Especially, I think, in a circumstance like that where you really find it and nobody knows and you're already in a pretty solid alliance, there's no reason to share it with anybody.
Yeah, like Carolyn's. Yeah.
Carolyn's was interesting too, just in the sense of her sitting in the background later when Tyler's going, but where's the white collar idol? Somewhere. So he's planning to target Joe, assuming, of course, that he doesn't win immunity.
Yep.
There's an interesting deleted scene of Joe in a confessional basically talking about just his mutual respect with Mike, that they both seem to really respect one another as competitors. Like they're willing to fight hard, but they can both tell that it's not personal and that they respect the other as a worthy opponent. So that's kind of cool. Buzz, buzz, buzz.
Yeah, I can't. My phone's not charging. Like it won't stay in. Sorry.
Oh,
So
see,
I
I
keep trying to
assume
mess
we're
with
getting
it.
texts.
Yeah.
Lots of texts.
No text. It just like plugs and unplugs. It won't like lock.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm gonna leave it alone.
Okay. So that brings us to the immunity challenge with the multi-stage slide puzzle. I liked the extra little detail of the hurdle that they had to climb over in between each stage. I mean, that was such a little thing, but I thought it added a lot.
Yep, I agree.
So we have to talk about before the challenge started, the whole gesture thing. Yeah. That was pretty entertaining. It was interesting with this episode. I feel like each episode sort of cements it more in my head of this idea of I simultaneously with Shireen really, really intuitively get why people find her so annoying. And I'm not sure that I wouldn't feel the same way. And yet, watching her on TV, I feel an affection for her.
Yes. Well, I think you and I are feeling what Joe feels and Haley feels. That, yeah, she's a little quirky and weird, and if you let it rub you the wrong way, it will definitely do that. But if you recognize the enthusiasm that she has, then it's kind of fun.
Yeah. She's enthusiastic about things.
She is, and like that's what Joe said when he was like, "You want to know why? That's why I took her." You know.
Yeah. So let's see. We end up with, let's see. I don't know. There was a couple of people in the lead, but it seemed like everybody was on the final puzzle before anyone finished it. And then now, of course, we have Dan and his twice in a row saying he's got it and being wrong. Now, I mean, we can, I think, all understand that there is a lot of pressure that they really want Joe to not win, right? And so the idea that you might be a little bit overexcited and jump the gun a little is one thing, but twice?
Yeah.
I think that he was too focused on just the colors of the words, and he was not reading the letters carefully. Because they showed us pictures of what his puzzle looked like, and you could see that the letters weren't lining up.
Yeah, I questioned that a little bit, like whether those were actually pictures of his or if they cut those in later.
Yeah.
I mean, I assume they were pictures of his, but...
Well, I mean, I think it seems reasonable to think that it would have looked like that. I mean, if it was wrong, it was wrong, right?
Yeah, I mean, he couldn't have been that wrong, or he wouldn't have said it. Like, it had to have been, like you said...
Probably just like maybe two reversed or something. And it was set so that it was not... it was not like it would look like two letters are reversed. It might still spell the word, but it's like you have like the bottom quarter of the letters that might not be lined up, or it might look almost right, but it's just crooked.
Yeah.
And he might be, in his enthusiasm, thinking that's maybe just because the pieces are just shifted a little bit, not because they're literally in the wrong place.
Yep.
So I don't know. To do that twice is kind of strange.
Yes.
But in any case, All of their panic is for naught because Joe actually does win again. So that's 3 individual challenges in a row. And so this is, of course, where Rodney has a legitimate point in pointing out, gosh, Mike, if we had just voted out Joe back when I wanted to, but no, you had to get Joaquin out instead. Yeah. I mean, that's not what we wanted to have happen, but you can certainly see from his perspective why he would be pretty annoyed by that.
Yep.
It's interesting, though, that we're getting so much over several episodes of Rodney plotting against Mike to like Starscream to his Megatron. And yet nothing's come of it yet. And I just wonder, are they building to some sort of an epic showdown, or is just Rodney kind of all talk here? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, there just seems like there's so much up in the air, like how this is all going to go down. I'm really just kind of letting it take me for the ride right now.
So let's see. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. That was I got a comment that I thought might be for us, but it was something else.
Okay.
So at this point, Shireen is kind of trying to look on the bright side of where her game is at, in the sense that nobody sees her as a threat, but she figures, well, that means no one's going to target me to vote me out. So let's try to work that.
Yep.
Except, of course, that several people do seem interested in targeting her for no apparent reason other than maybe just they don't like her. And at the same time, maybe it could be at that point where when you have what looks like a substantial numbers alliance, that's when, and you're in the position where the person you really want to vote out can't be voted out. What other reason do you choose? Right? Might as well be someone you find annoying.
Yeah.
But of course, Tyler speculates that she might have an idol. Where is the white collar idol? I was a little surprised that we didn't get a reminder that it's Carolyn, just because it was a while ago that she found it. But in any case, Carolyn has it.
Yeah.
Dan is skeptical, still a jerk, but right in this case, at least, that she doesn't have it. But even though it was a jerky thing to say,
he said he accurately identified the best case for why she didn't have it.
Yeah, is that I don't think she would successfully be able to hide it.
Yeah, but he said it in such a jerk way.
Yeah, well, and at the same time that it's absolutely an awful thing to say, I have to at least give him comedy credit that it's a good line. Maybe she's an idiot savant, but I'm leaning more toward the idiot side.
Yeah.
He doesn't get credit for coming up with that. I'm sure he's heard someone say that. But in any case, he's certainly right in the sense that she doesn't have it. But of course, he continues his trend of, doesn't matter whether, it's the line that keeps coming up in this show. We've used it to describe so many people. The line from The Big Lebowski: "You're not wrong. You're just an asshole."
Yep.
In any case, Mike, perhaps a little bit worried about whether Shireen might have an idol, especially just given how they got burned the last time, suggests maybe Haley as an alternate. Meanwhile, we have the younger girls, everyone, all the girls except for Carolyn, Jen, Sierra, Haley, and Shireen, having girl talk about their dislike for Dan and, to a lesser extent, Rodney, but Dan certainly seems to be the one they're focused on at the moment.
Because Rodney's calmed down with his,
yeah,
shots at girls. He's just sort of he's just kind of petulant right now. He's not really, being a jerk. Well,
and the other thing is, too, we got the confessional from Rodney of him basically pointing out that he kind of became a little bit more aware of how that's not good. So he's been trying to go off and vent his frustrations every so often, and maybe that has translated to being less aggressive in camp.
Yes, I think it has. Whereas Dan still thinks that he knows how to talk to girls.
He does not understand why what he's saying is awful.
No.
But the one thing though about Rodney, when he talks about punching trees, I just envision that, and like, I know that it's like a thing that people are mad and they like punch a wall or something like that, but I just like, doesn't that hurt your hand?
I think that's part of why, though, is I think you kind of like that hurt, like kind of is the outlet.
I don't know. That is so, like, I guess I understand the impulse, but I would just never do it because it would hurt my hand. I don't know. I feel like if I was mad enough to commit, inanimate object violence, I would throw things rather than punch something.
Yeah. You do not share a lot of qualities with Rodney, so it's probably hard.
Well, I think you're probably right in that assessment. So in any case, they talk about the idea of potentially wanting to do an all-girl alliance. Sierra seems to be on board for that, even if it means betraying her blue collars. But I think, as we talked about a little bit already, the basic problem ultimately was they just really didn't have the numbers to do it.
Right.
Not without a fifth. And if they don't want to do it with Carolyn, because Carolyn seems to be not meshing with that group, and then it's going to be hard to convince a guy to come over to help out your all-girl alliance. Because even if they don't pitch it as that, which why would they? But even if they don't, he'd be dumb not to see it. It's like, oh, hey, the 4 young girls who are not previously all on the same tribe are pitching a new secret alliance. Gosh, I wonder what that could be all about. But anyway, at the same time, the idea of cutting out a leg from under the Blue Alliance, you could see how that could have some appeal too, right? Although weirdly targeting Dan, I'm not sure. Like, we understand why they want Dan out, but why does Tyler want Dan out? Is Dan a threat? Is he?
Only to slapping women.
Yeah. I mean, if you're all about taking out the Blue Alliance, then why not Rodney? Why not Mike? I mean, maybe not Rodney, because I think that they've actually accurately diagnosed that Rodney's not actually the one running the show over there. But why not Mike? If that's the goal, then why not Mike?
Yeah.
I think maybe Tyler figured out, it's like, hey, voting for Dan doesn't actually make sense unless it's personal, and I'm not really on board for that.
Right. And clearly that's the girls' thing. So why give the girls what they want? Because that doesn't put me in a better position.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's see. I think, that pretty much brings us to tribal council.
Yep, which was pretty quick.
And I liked that they echoed, first of all, our discussion from last time, which was that all that stuff about drawing a sharp line down the center of the tribe was nonsense, because it didn't do that at all. And I liked that they said so. And it was also, especially after the previous conversation, a little vindicating to have Dan come out with this stuff about how flippers never win, and for Shireen to immediately say, what? That's stupid. Of course they do.
Yeah, and then like outline all of the times that they did.
Yeah.
And Haley had her weirdly patriotic, like.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought that was kind of just silly, but
I mean, it was funny.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think even she knew that she was kind of just saying it to hear herself talk rather than it being meaningful in the context of the game.
No, it wasn't trying to sell anybody on why this was the idea of why you should flip, and they all kind of like.
Yeah.
I thought it was funny though.
Yeah, no, I liked it too. So in any case, it wasn't a super long tribal council. Oh, and one of the, I guess, just related to the Shireen Dan thing, I liked that she pointed out not only that he was wrong, but specifically saying this is just a fear tactic to try to convince people to not flip on them, which, you know, at the same time that it's, you know, semi-obvious, actually just giving a name to it, I think can be powerful.
Yep.
Although in this case, ineffective, unfortunately. So with 6 votes to 4, Haley goes home.
Yep.
I was confused a little bit with Joe saying, I'm sorry, because I was thinking, what? Did Joe vote against them? Surely not. But apparently, I mean, yeah, so he did vote with them. He was one of the 4 because both Tyler and Sierra both voted with the other side to vote out Haley.
Yeah, I mean, everybody remained where they were at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting, Haley is going to be the first member of the jury.
Yep.
So that meant that there was also a Ponderosa video. And an interesting detail there was that in her Ponderosa video, she talks about being angry at Shireen because she believes that Shireen didn't vote with them and that their 4th vote was Will, who didn't vote with them. So she thought Will was on their side and is wrong and blames Shireen for being the one other person to flip.
Interesting.
Yeah. I wonder how long it will take for her to find out that she was mistaken.
All right. Well, we need to wrap up. Unfortunately, we need to make dinner before Game of Thrones.
Sure. Well, we're just about there at the end anyway of the episode. So next time we see an awkward challenge, which with lots of people falling on their butts and into water. And then Jen appears to be in despair, at least temporarily, which we certainly get why that would be, you know, because the numbers thing has just been driven home even harder. Her best friend, ally, Haley, is gone. But I think we can just hope that that's just a temporary, you know, bit of the blues and that she's not actually giving up.
Yeah, it might just be again because her friend's gone. So
yeah, and it's also true that the previews have done that before, where we'll have a 2-minute scene of her being depressed, and then it'll finish with, "But I'm still here to play," and then we're back to.
Yep. So we'll see.
Yep. So that's it for this time, everybody. Thank you for watching and/or listening, and we'll be back next week for the next episode of Talking About Survivor.
Yep.